All right, so this is video one on Sophocles' famous tragedy, Oedipus the King. The whole series is called Energy Coherence and the Possibility of Human Achievement. And the first goal of the series is to have us learn the cultural literacy on Greek tragedy. And this is the best place to start because it's the most famous of all the tragedies. So, the origins of tragedy, where does it come from? Well, if you really want to think about it, it starts with the Greeks being great colonialists and being so good at it that they develop income streams that don't require them to work. And so they have, unfortunately, slaves do their work. Anybody who could own a slave owned a slave in Greece, in Athens. And they have free time. And they have the free time to start doing other things than tending to their food, clothing, and shelter, and they start asking themselves, who they are. What can we do and who may we be? And they start asking these humanistic questions for the first time in some ways in the West, at least in Greece. And some of these guys are friends, and it seems like tragedy starts with people out in the woods, and they're juiced on life and maybe some other things, and they're trying to articulate the sort of joy of being alive and the pain of being alive and the question of being alive, and so it starts as a chorus. So the origins of tragedy are about, our guys out in the woods reveling in the zestiness and difficulties of life. And they turn that into an art form. And it starts with about 50 dancers in masks. And they then also sing. And eventually they speak in unison. So the origin of Greek tragedy is a chorus of dancers, singers, and eventually speakers. They're wearing masks because they have a sense that who they're portraying in their everyday lives is a kind of mask of a more primal unity, which they call Dionysus, and they worship as Dionysus. And there's this odd sense that the everyday person that they are is a mask for that deeper reality. As official tragedies start, the ones that we've inherited, there's at least one actor. And so one of the tragedy figures, one of the choristers, eventually, as tragedy develops, speaks from his own voice, again with a mask, but all 50 guys are dancing and singing one thing, and then one of these guys has a particular stance about being a self, right? And so there's this tension opens between the whole group, which is sort of the community and nature, and this one voice that's like an individual that is also part of the chorus. So the Greeks are hyper aware of this issue of how does an individual emerge from nature and how does an individual emerge from an entire community. It's a central issue behind all the other issues of Greek tragedy. Eventually, as tragedies develop, there's two actors, right? And not just one. There's two people that actually take on a specific role, and that allows for a kind of problem between those two people. An agon, they call it, or word agony comes from it, a struggle between these two people. Excuse me. Eventually there's three, and then eventually there's more. But this goes slowly, and just to make a long story short, Greek tragedy starts with a chorus it ends with the chorus disappearing after a century or a century and a half of development, and it's left with more like today, a bunch of individual actors that are struggling, for their own benefit. And so it's all about the agon. So it starts as the chorus and chorus alone. It then becomes about how an individual emerges from the unity of the chorus, and then it ceases to really be Greek tragedy as it moves into the kind of drama we know today of just a bunch of people making their way in the world. So we've talked about a few of these already, but the implicit themes in Greek tragedy. So communities become self-conscious and articulate their concerns about their own self-preservation. So that is the chorus. The chorus is like, how do we keep our identity? How do we keep out foreigners? How do we decide on questions of justice within the community? How do we deal with individuals who seem to think they're above the community? And how do we govern ourselves? And they articulate 50 voices at once, like blah, 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 blah. They're asking about all of these questions. And so another theme of Greek tragedy is how much can humans understand nature? Often in Greek tragedy, in Oedipus in particular, there are people who think that they can understand nature themselves, that they don't need gods, that nature is intelligible and masterable and humans can do that. And the chorus often pushes back against that, and religion pushes back against that and says, actually, no, God and nature and fate are not ultimately intelligible. So that's a live issue in Greek tragedy. How much control do we have? So if we can understand nature, can't we control it? If we can't understand nature, maybe we can't control it. So that's always an issue behind the scenes in Greek tragedy. Related, what is the ultimate human power and achievement? Like, what is being a human at its highest? We'll see that issue play itself out in Oedipus. Should humans revere the energies of nature as embodied in the gods, or human cunning to control nature more? Where are we supposed to put our eggs? Are we supposed to put our eggs in, we humans are teeny and we need the gods, and nature's just too big and huge, and we're going to throw ourselves at the mercy of fate and not be hubristic? Or should we try to figure this all out and control it, or somehow both, or what's going on there? It's a huge question in the history of Greek tragedy. What's the ultimate human power and achievement? Whoops, we already had that one. Sorry about that. How do humans emerge from nature and communities into themselves? We've talked about that in the earlier slide. But what is the relation? Is somebody in the chorus, or are they on their own? Is somebody an Athenian first, or a Theban first, or are they themselves first, right? And so that question is still alive and kicking today. And then also the battle between Dionysus and Apollo in Greek tragedy. So Dionysus is sort of this unity god where all the energies of the world are primordial and they're together, and the world is this just fireball of communal energy. And then Apollo is the god of limit, the god of sculpture, the god of intelligence and intelligibility. And so you have these individual characters that are emerging from communities and wondering how to deal with those communities and wondering how much loyalty they're supposed to give to themselves versus others. And that's a play between Dionysus and Apollo. Those two gods are sort of at war and in reconciliation and struggling. In every Greek tragedy, Dionysus and Apollo, the spirit of the whole energies that can't be sundered and the spirit of individuals that have their own being are at play and struggling. And so also that raises the issue of religion. So Greek tragedy starts. The origin of Greek tragedy is the festival of Dionysus. It really becomes a big deal. It's a huge religious festival. They performed 3 plays. The first one at sunup, the last one at sundown, and pretty much city life stopped. So it's like the Super Bowl meets church meets a rock concert. I mean, it's like a huge deal. So you have to imagine a community of 100,000 people, 15,000 of them are all seeing a performance at the same time. It's a big slice of the population. And so it's like a big deal. They're coming there to figure out, to hear, to think, to merge together and deal with the city's problems and deal with the beginnings of humanism. This, like, trying to figure out, what is a human being? How does it relate to nature? How does it relate to its city state? How are they to relate to each other? How do they relate to God? And what are they supposed to do? And what sort of meaning can they have and should have? And ultimately, tragedies deal with somebody getting ripped apart. Somebody gets killed. Somebody gets devastated. Even beyond physical death, they get ripped apart spiritually. Like, they don't really understand where they are. They get knocked around so badly. Like, their understanding of themselves gets so skewed. And so part of the idea, and this is Aristotle's idea, is that Greek tragedy has a cathartic function, meaning subconscious issues that all these people have as being at the cutting edge of Greek life and Athenian life and Theban life and humanistic life. They're uneasy about all these questions. They go to see the Greek tragedy and they see their own subconscious anxieties played out on the stage, and they hear them talked about, and they have their own terror, their own fright, their own repressed anxieties about not knowing the answers to these questions. Get helped, get soothed, get expended, because you're emotionally tied up with what's going on the stage. You're really part of it as a spectator, because you're sort of invited to take the place of the chorus, take the place of the actor, and you leave cleansed of all that. That's one of the main goals of Greek tragedy, and that's what Greek tragedy is about.